Let me ask you a question, and I want you to be honest with yourself when you answer it. Think back to this past spring. Your tomato plants were everything they were supposed to be. Green, stout, loaded with flowers, maybe already setting the first small fruits that made you stop whatever else you were doing and stand there looking at what you had managed to grow. You had done the work. Water on schedule, fertilizer by the label, plants staked the way every guide you had ever read told you to do it. For weeks, everything went exactly right. Then July came. Flowers started dropping before they turned into anything. Leaves curled tight in the middle of the afternoon in a way that looked wrong. The plant that had been adding growth every single week went still and quiet. So you gave it more water. You added fertilizer because when a plant is struggling and you do not know why, that is what the instructions say to do. You stood over it with $12 worth of Bloom Booster and every intention of helping, and it got no better. You pruned. Maybe you bought something different and tried that. Still, the plant would not come back to what it had been in May. And somewhere in those weeks you began blaming yourself. Maybe the wrong variety, maybe the wrong soil, maybe you just did not know enough to carry a tomato plant through a summer like the one you had. I need you to hear one thing before we go any further. You did not fail. July happened to you, and the instructions on that bag were never written for your July. My name is Elias. I am Amish. My family has grown tomatoes on this Lancaster County ground for generations, and I have kept this kitchen garden myself for 31 years. I will tell you what your plant has been trying to say all along, why the things you reached for made it harder on the plant rather than easier, and what I do in a 3-hour window every afternoon in July that has done more for this garden than any product I have ever purchased. The plants that rest well through July are the plants that give a second flush of fruit when September cools the nights. I have watched it happen here more seasons than I can easily count. Subscribe now so you do not miss what is coming. I will get to that window before we are finished. Now, here is the thing most people are never told, and it sits underneath every problem I have just described. Most advice written about growing tomatoes was written for mild summer climates, the Pacific Northwest, parts of New England, higher elevations where July stays cool enough that tomatoes set fruit from spring all the way through fall without interruption. Those gardeners follow the same book from April to October, and it works perfectly well for them. Most gardening books and seed catalogs were written with those gardens in mind, because that is where a great many of the people who write about gardening happen to live. But if you are growing tomatoes somewhere that gets real summer heat, inland California, Texas, Oklahoma, the Southeast, anywhere July climbs past 90 and nights stay too warm to give the plant any relief, you are not living in those books. Your tomato season looks nothing like what any label describes. Spring is extraordinary. The plants push hard and flower abundantly, and the first harvest comes on strong. Then July arrives and production slows or stops entirely, and you spend the rest of summer convinced something went wrong. Nothing went wrong. You are gardening in a climate those books were not written for. There are places where summer becomes severe enough that fighting through it is not worth attempting at all. Parts of the low desert, deep West Texas. Gardeners there do not try to push tomatoes through extreme heat. They plant one crop in late winter for a strong spring harvest, pull those plants when the brutal heat arrives, and start fresh again in early fall for a second. That is not giving up. That is gardening with your climate instead of against it. The point is not to match a calendar. The point is to understand what season your plants are actually living in. A tomato plant in May has one purpose, and that purpose is building. Roots going down, leaves going up, all available energy driving into growth and flowers and early fruit. But when July arrives and the heat climbs past 95 degrees and nights stay warm instead of cooling the way they should, the plant shifts. Not gradually. All at once, the way a man who hears difficult news about his finances stops spending and starts saving on the same day. The plant looks at its conditions and makes a clear decision. I am not here to produce anything right now. I am here to survive. That is not sickness. That is not your failure or the plant's. That is a living thing making the only intelligent decision available to it. And every bag of fertilizer you add in July, every anxious extra watering, every well-intentioned pruning you do, hoping to wake the plant back up, is working against a decision the plant made for a reason. You are not helping it. You are arguing with it. Stop asking how to make your tomatoes produce more in July. Ask instead how to help this plant make it to September. The plant that comes through the worst heat with something still left in it is the plant that sets flowers again when the nights finally cool. In this garden, those are the plants that give tomatoes in October when the neighbors' beds have already been turned over. My grandfather kept this garden before I did. He was not a man who read books about growing tomatoes. He watched them. One summer, when I was 11 or 12 years old, we stood together in the garden in the middle of a long, hot stretch. The plants had gone quiet the way they do in July. I asked him what we should give them. He stood looking at the plants for a long moment, then looked up at the sky, then looked back. He said, "Elias, the plant already knows what it needs. Your job right now is to stay out of its way." I did not understand that for years. Now I understand it entirely. Before you can work with your plant instead of against it, you need to understand what it is telling you when you walk out to the garden each morning. The first signal is leaf curl. The leaves roll inward tight in the middle of the afternoon, and the first thought is always the same. Something is wrong. The hose comes out. Here is what is happening. When the air is dry and temperatures have been above 90 since morning, a tomato leaf can lose water faster than the roots below can pull it back up. So the plant closes the surface. The leaf curls inward to reduce exposure to the sun and the dry pulling wind. Less surface exposed means less water lost. It is the plant doing the only thing available to it, which is close its shutters during the worst heat of the day. That is not a problem to fix. It is a working response from a plant that understands its own situation. When should you worry? When the curl comes with yellowing. When dark spots appear that were not there last week. When the whole plant is declining, not merely protecting itself on an afternoon when the temperature has not dropped below 90 since morning. A plant that curls by 2 in the afternoon and opens again in the cool of evening is doing exactly what it should. A plant that stays curled through the cool of the next morning is asking for something different, and that is when you look closer. The second signal is blossom drop. You walk out one morning and the flowers are on the ground. The plant looks healthy otherwise, green and standing. But the flowers that gave you real hope 2 days ago are in the dirt with nothing started behind them. The immediate conclusion most people reach is that the plant needs more to eat. Another $12 bag of Bloom Booster. Here is what is happening, and this is not printed on any label I have ever read. A tomato flower cannot become a tomato without pollination, and pollination depends on pollen that works. When temperatures stay consistently above 92 or 93 degrees, tomato pollen becomes unreliable. The flower opens and looks completely healthy. The bee visits. But the conditions are not right for what needs to happen inside. The plant does not keep investing in a process it cannot complete. It drops the flower and waits for better conditions. Adding nitrogen to a plant dropping blossoms in July heat is like adding more wood to a fire that will not draw because the chimney is blocked. The problem is not the fuel. No bag of fertilizer changes the temperature of the air around that blossom. And this is where the instinct to do something becomes the problem itself. When you see a plant struggling in July, the hardest thing is to stop. Not because doing nothing is always the right answer, but because most of what an anxious gardener reaches for in July, more fertilizer, more pruning, more of whatever seems likely to help, makes things worse before it makes them better. The question in July is not, what can I add to this plant? The question is, what can I stop doing that is working against it? There is no money in telling a man to put the bag down and give the plant a rest. Nobody runs a commercial for patience, and so a whole country of gardeners reaches for another $12 bag in July when what the plant is asking for is shade and a few weeks of being left alone. Now, I want to be specific about the thing I have not seen taught anywhere else, because it is the reason I asked you to stay with me this far. There is a window in every summer afternoon that does more damage to a tomato plant than the entire rest of the day combined. It runs from roughly 2 in the afternoon to 5. By 2 o'clock, the sun angle is still high enough to bear down directly on the plant, but the soil has also been absorbing heat since sunrise and is now radiating it back upward from below. The plant is caught between heat from above and heat rising from below, both at once, for 3 full hours. That is where blossom drop accelerates. That is where leaf curl goes from protective to damaging. That is where root zone temperatures climb past what the plant was built to sustain. My grandfather noticed this not by studying it, but by watching the garden across 40 years in this same ground. The plants along the fence line, in the shadow of the old apple trees from early afternoon on, always came through July in better condition than the ones in the open. The plants near the woodshed, where the building's shadow reached the beds by 2 o'clock, were always stronger come September. He rearranged his rows the following spring to take advantage of those shadows. Not full shade, never full shade, just the path of natural relief during the 3 hours that punished the rest of the garden hardest. He said it once, and I have thought of it every July since: you cannot cool the sky, but you can give the plant an afternoon off. Old burlap from the granary or a worn sheet from the house, held up on 2 stakes high enough that air still moves underneath. No $40 shade cloth from the hardware store. The material is already in every house and barn in this county. 2 in the afternoon to 5. That is the window. Let me be plain about water as well, because the common advice here is only half right. When people hear that plants need more water in the heat, they water more often, every day, sometimes twice, a small amount each time. The roots have no reason to go deeper because moisture is always near the surface. And the surface of your soil in July is the hottest place your roots can be. Water deeply and less often instead. A long, slow soaking every 3 or 4 days, enough to reach 12 inches into the ground. When the surface dries between waterings, the roots go looking for moisture downward, and they find cooler soil when they get there. Then put 3 or 4 inches of straw or old hay over the soil around each plant. Mulch holds moisture and keeps surface heat from reaching the root zone the way bare ground allows it to. Now, about pruning in July, because this is where well-intentioned gardeners do real damage, and I want to be clear. In spring, pruning is about building structure. You are shaping the plant, guiding its energy, making decisions about how it will carry its fruit. That is right work for April and May, and I do not skip it. But by July, the job has changed entirely. By July, you are not building anything. You are protecting what you have already built. And that changes what every leaf on that plant means. The leaves you are looking at removing in July, the ones making the plant look full and slightly wild, are not there by accident. They are shading the developing fruit from the worst afternoon sun. They are slowing the rate at which the plant loses water through its surface. They are doing real work inside a difficult season. Before you remove a leaf in July, ask one question: is this leaf causing a problem, or is it helping this plant survive August? I still remove suckers. I still take off anything dead, diseased, or damaged. I still train the vines up and keep them off the ground. Those fundamentals do not change with the season. But I no longer try to make the plant look tidy in July. A plant carrying a full canopy of leaves in the height of summer is not an unruly plant. It is a working plant. My grandfather would look at a stripped plant in July and shake his head without saying a word. When September came and that plant had nothing left to work with, the empty beds answered the question on their own. One more piece, and it belongs here. We have used willow bark water in this garden as long as I can remember. My grandmother made it before anyone in our community had a name for why it worked. Take strips of bark from a willow along a creek bank, soak them overnight in a gallon of clean water, and pour that water around the base of your plants once a week through July and August. Be certain you know your willow first. It has long, narrow leaves and branches that lean and droop toward the water. If you are not certain, leave this one alone and do the other things first. Willow bark carries a compound science eventually named salicin, and the same road leads to what we now call aspirin. It helps a plant under stress activate its own natural defenses. It costs nothing if you have willows near any water close to your property. Now here is the honest part, and I will give it to you plainly, because you deserve that more than you deserve a promise. The bold version of what I have described today says these methods will carry every tomato through any July without losing a single blossom. The plain truth is that a summer severe enough will take plants that have everything working for them. There are years in this valley when July beats the garden no matter what we have prepared. That is what is honestly possible, and I would rather say it once clearly than leave you in August expecting something these methods cannot deliver. But the plant that goes into the worst of July with deep roots, mulched soil, 3 hours of afternoon shelter, and leaves left where they belong is not the same plant as the one with none of those things. It holds more blossoms. It comes out of August with something left in it, and the plant that has something left when September arrives is the one that rewards you with tomatoes in October, when the neighbor has already put away the stakes. That second harvest has made more seasons worth keeping than I could count. Here is what I would do starting tonight. Walk out to the garden and look at the ground under your plants. If it is bare, that is first. A few inches of straw tomorrow morning changes the root zone immediately. Next time you water, water long and slow, and then leave it 3 days. Beginning this afternoon, rig something between your plants and the sun from 2 in the afternoon to 5. Any woven fabric between 2 stakes does the work. And before you remove a single leaf this week, ask whether it is causing a problem or doing a job. Those 4 things ask nothing you do not already have. Tell me in the comments where you are gardening this year and how your July has felt. When your plants slowed down in the heat, what was the first thing you reached for? Tell me what your soil is like as well, sand or clay or good black ground. I read every single one, and I will tell you which of these to put your attention on first. Next time I want to show you how to choose the right tomato variety for the summer you actually have, not the summer printed on the seed packet. Most catalog descriptions were written for mild climates that cover less than a third of this country. I will show you what the labels do not tell you, and the old varieties my grandfather kept in this ground because they held through Lancaster heat when the catalog selections gave up. Subscribe so you do not miss it. Stay cool, stay watchful, and remember, the people who built this country with their hands knew things we are only just starting to remember.